Welcome to a Magic the Gathering video with November Lima, and we are right around the corner of Innistrad Midnight Hunt. We are going back to the plane that is very popular, filled with vampires and werewolves, and along with that, standard will rotate. So, just like I've done with the last couple sets, I'm going to be talking about my top 10 cards for standard. Um, and I really went through with a fine tooth comb and tried to pick those 10 cards that I think will be very impactful in a broad spectrum of decks and against a broad spectrum of decks. So really went through this time, and I feel like I've come with a really solid list. Um, and you'll see that the power level overall has gone down a little bit, but that's okay because standard is rotating. Power level is going down a little bit, but a lot of archetypes and playstyles are opening up with this set. And a lot of playstyles that'll be viable. So it's going to be really interesting. It's going to be a lot of fun. So let's just jump right in here. First off, like I've done with previous sets, I am not including a new land cycle. So the land cycles are obviously really powerful that are coming out. We've got what's called the slow lands. So as long as you have two or more other lands on the battlefield, these come in untapped. Otherwise, they'll be tapped, which is incredible, especially later in the game if you need some color fixing. These lands are for the allied colors and just overall look really, really good. But yeah, like I said, I'm not going to include the lands. But if you're looking for a wild card, how to spend your wild cards best or most effectively, lands are always your go-to for sure. But without further ado, let's just jump into our top 10, and we'll start with number 2. So just like this guy in the picture here, join me, and let's jump right in. All right, so here for number 10, we have Death Bonnet Sprout. Death Bonnet Sprout is probably the one that I was most up on the fence about, but I think it's going to see play. Let's just read what it does. It's a 1 green, so just 1 green mana for a creature fungus that's a 1/1. At the beginning of your upkeep, you mill a card, and if there are 3 or more creature cards in your graveyard, you transform Death Bonnet Sprout. Um, I think this is incredibly powerful, just this effect alone. So let's just focus on this side first before we go to the other side, what it transforms into. Um, Eben, Death. No, not Eben Death. That's a dragon. There's a 1 card, Egon, God of Death, in Kaldheim. That was already quite powerful because it can mill, and it'll still be in standard. So that's really incredible alongside with Deathbond and Sprout. Um, but it really was only opening up for like Kroxa. What we're seeing here is that this will be very interesting because a lot of Innistrad is about putting creatures in your graveyard or different spell types in your graveyard, and also having a lot of cards with flashback. So even if you mill a spell, it's not necessarily a feels bad because you can play it at a later time um, for more mana, perhaps. But then again, there's also some triggers in the game that allow you to benefit from pulling stuff out of your graveyard. So I think that Death Bonnet Sprout, where the God of Death not necessarily had a lot of strategies, I think Death Bonnet Sprout will. And also, it's easier to play than the Death God or God of Death because the God of Death had to exile once you were on the creature side. But Death Bonnet Sprout, that's not the case. So let's look at the other side. So again, you're playing this for 1 green to get this effect. But then once you have 3 creature cards in your graveyard, it changes into a 3/3. So basically, you had a 1 mana 1/1 that turns into a 3/3 pretty easily, probably, in the decks that you're playing it in. So at the beginning of your upkeep, you may exile a card from your graveyard. If a creature card was exiled this way, you put a +1/+1 counter on Death Bonnet Hulk. So this can get really big. For a 1/1, again, that's really neat. Um, Even if you play this in a deck that doesn't necessarily need to mill a lot, if you play only a couple copies in a creature deck, you're going to expect some of your creatures to die. That's just part of being a creature deck. This flips very easily, so you'll have a 1 mana 3/3 that can potentially grow like a Scavenging Ooze, but without having to spend mana or to you won't gain a life. But from an aggressive standpoint, it's incredibly powerful. What's also nice is that you don't have to exile any of your creature cards. So, like Egon, the God of Death, it doesn't have that downside of potentially having to leave the battlefield because you can't exile no more. So all in all, I think this will have a lot of ways to apply itself, whether it's aggressively in a more creature deck, whether it's in a graveyard-oriented deck like Golgari, or even in a spells deck like Temur with an aggressive shell. I think there's going to be a lot of applications for this card. Overall, a lot of value for just 1 mana. So let's go and jump into number 9. Number 9, I picked Rite of Oblivion. Rite of Oblivion is a sorcery. That's probably the only downside of this card. And it's a white and a black. As an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a non-land permanent. Exile target non-land permanent. Overall, such an upgrade of some previous versions of a card like this we've seen. So a lot of cards we've seen like this are either 2 or 3 mana, some 1, where you have to sacrifice one of your creatures to destroy a creature or planeswalker. This takes care of non-land permanents, and you can exile a non-land permanent. So let's say you have an artifact that's not doing anything anymore, or an enchantment that's not relevant anymore. You can exile one of those, or even a token. You have a 1/1 token or a treasure token, whatever that is. There's a lot of things you can sacrifice for this cost and take out your opponent's most powerful thing on the battlefield. That is insane. What makes this even better is once you play this, it goes in your graveyard. You can bring it back for 4 mana. For 4 mana, you get to play it again. 4 mana to exile or a non-land permanent is an unreally good cost. That's why overall this is a really powerful card. This might even be higher in the top 10 in reality. But it's there regardless. I have it as number 9 because I think there are some other cards that'll be a little easier to play. I think Orzhov overall looks very powerful coming into the set. There's a lot of powerful decks already that use white and black. And if you look at like a Mardu Sacrifice deck, there's currently one in standard 2022 format that's really powerful. If you have a couple copies of this, to be able to sacrifice some of your tokens or your 1/1 zombie that gives you a treasure token or something along those lines, you get massive value out of this because you want to sacrifice one of your non-land permanents, and it allows you to exile something along those lines. So there's no downsides to playing this card. Like I said, the only thing that is a slight downside is that it's a sorcery speed card. But you know what? For all the upsides, this card is fantastic. I am really surprised this isn't uncommon. This is going to be very powerful. I love this card. Going into number 8. Number 8, we have Wrenn and 7. And in reality, I should have probably put this at number 7 simply because it says Wrenn and 7. But you know what? The next Wrenn we're going to see is going to be Wrenn and 8. So it's all good. For those of you that don't understand that reference, Wrenn and 6 was the previous card that came out in a modern set. So Wrenn and 7 is a Planeswalker for 3, a green and a green. And it comes in with 5 loyalty. So it's a 5 CMC, 5 loyalty Planeswalker, which is pretty much what we see normally. It has 4 loyalty abilities. So first off, the +1 ability. Reveal the top 4 cards of your library, put all land cards revealed this way into your hand, and the rest into your graveyard. So that's pretty sweet from a ramp standpoint. Like I said before with number 10, the Death Bonnet Sprout, is that there's a lot of graveyard synergies coming up. Graveyard Hate is going to be really big, really important, because being able to just put a bunch of cards with flashback into the graveyard while you ramp yourself is pretty sweet. Then the number 0 ability, or the 0 loyalty ability, is also incredibly interesting. Put any number of land cards from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. This could potentially be an incredible ramp. Let's say you do your +1 first, and of those 4 cards, 2 of them are lands. Next turn, you have 3 lands in your hand. Maybe you can just drop those all at once if you would want to. That's incredible. That could be really, really powerful. There's a lot of ways in Standard coming up where you can play land cards from the top, where you can draw additional lands or put lands in your hand. So with Wrenn and 7 being able to just play those out at no downside is incredibly powerful. Now, every good Planewalker can defend itself, so this one can as well. -3 ability is create a green tree folk creature token with reach, and this creature's power and toughness are each equal to the number of lands you control. So that's a pretty solid blocker right there. I'm saying blocker instead of attacker because it doesn't have trample, it doesn't have any kind of evasion, so in reality it can be chump blocked all day long. But being able to protect Renin 7 with a at least 5 mana creature, well, I say at least, you could have cast this with treasures perhaps, but most of the times this is probably going to be like at least a 4 or 5 power toughness creature. That's pretty solid. Now, if you think about it, you're going to be dropping lands. That's why you have Renin 7 in your deck. So that the tree folks you cast create with this are probably going to get pretty swole pretty quickly. The -8 is incredibly interesting. Return all permanent cards from your graveyard to your hand. You get an emblem with you have no maximum hand size. So that means that you're going to get a lot of cards back. Now, keep in mind, this is not sorceries or instants. This is just the permanents. But still, that is pretty cool. So if you get to that 8 ability and you have milled a bunch of your stuff, you can just pull the permanents back. You probably have a lot of lands by this time, so you can probably play a lot of those things and just go absolutely nuts. So I feel like that -8 typically will translate into a very dominant board state. So that's why Renin 7 is number 8 for me, because you can do some really nutso things with this card. All right, going into the next one, number 7. Sigardian Savior. 3, a white and a white for a creature angel. That's a 3/3 with flying. When Sigardian Savior enters the battlefield, if you cast it, return up to 2 target creature cards with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So this is basically a flying Lurrus that enters the battlefield and triggers twice. Is really powerful. We've seen how powerful Lurrus is. Is this as good as Lurrus? No, it's not, but it is definitely a powerful effect. Look at the decks that this would fit in. This would fit in, obviously, in an Angels deck, so you could put 2 Valkyries back, or maybe you have some Cleric synergies with your Angel deck. Being able to bring 2 Clerics back. If you're aggressive in white and you have this at your top end just to bring like 2 powerful white creatures back, it's very powerful. A 3 mana or a 5 mana 3/3 with flying is not great, but if you combine that for a 5 mana 3/3 flyer and a 2/3 cleric and a 2/1 creature, suddenly that's a lot of value. Also, a deck that I mentioned earlier that I think will still be very powerful is like the Mardu Sacrifice Shell. Play this, get 2 of your zombies back that you can then sacrifice again for -1/-1 or treasure tokens. And suddenly you get a lot of value for 5 mana. Overall, this is just a value card. This is not one that you play to beat your opponent down with. This is just sheer value, and I think it'll see a lot of play because of it. Number 6, so this is the top half of the top 5, if you will. Brutal Cathar. 2 and a white for a creature, human soldier, werewolf, and it's a 2/2. When this creature enters the battlefield or transforms into Brutal Cathar, exile target creature an opponent controls until this creature leaves the battlefield with Daybound. So let's focus on the front half first before we go to the back half. Overall, really solid. A 3 mana 2/2 that exiles target creature an opponent controls until this leaves the battlefield. Kind of reminds us a little bit of Apparition, Skyclave Apparition. However, Skyclave Apparition does any non-land permanent 4 mana or less. So to me, this kind of has the same vibe. The only reason why this is in the top half of the top 10 and not in the bottom half of the top 10, like the good top 5, is because it limits itself to target creatures. And also because once this dies, the opponent gets their creature back. Why I still think this is super powerful, because especially targeting tokens is fantastic. Taking out any big tokens or little tokens doesn't matter. And also just the versatility of taking other creatures when it transforms. So it transforms pretty powerfully into Moonrage Brute, which is a 3/3 with first strike, and it has a ward, pay 3 life. So if this transforms into Moonrage Brute, you get to exile something else, or the same thing if you'd want to, and it's suddenly a 3/3 first striker. The ward ability is really nice too. It gives it an aggressive shell, so if your opponent wants to do something about it, they're going to have to pay 3 life for it, and in combat, it's very strong because of the first strike. So it has a little bit of protection, giving it a little bit more of a downside to do something about this other than just getting your creature back. So with that being said, I think this is a very powerful card, and we'll see a lot of play in a lot of decks that play white. Even though this side is red, doesn't mean you have to play red to play it. As long as you can play the Brutal Cathar, you're in great shape. Also, let's just appreciate this art. I love this art style that's coming out with this showcase. Oh my gosh, Magic the Gathering, Wizards of the Coast, please keep doing the showcase arts. It's awesome. I love it. So we've done 6 to 10. Now it's time to get to the top 5. Number 5, Arlinn the Pack's Hope. 2, a red and a green for legendary Planeswalker Arlinn, and it comes in with 4 loyalty. So again, 4 mana, 4 loyalty, and it's daybound. +1 ability, until your next turn, you may cast creature spells as though they had flash, and each creature you control enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. That's already incredibly powerful. That allows you to trigger your day to night transition because you're not playing anything during your turn if you have Arlinn on the battlefield and you just want to play your creatures. So with a deck where you play an Arlinn the Pack's Hope, you'll probably be playing more instants than sorceries, and you'll probably be playing your creatures off of this +1 ability once you can, so you can trigger the nighttime. Very powerful. Fits in a lot of aggressive decks. Doesn't need to be a werewolf deck. I already really love the 3 mana Vivien that we had, where you can play creatures on Flash. I actually won an FNM because of it. That was my first ever FNM win, so I will always have a little bit more affinity towards this effect than probably most others. But very, very powerful. Plus, giving creatures +1/+1 counter when they come in with Flash makes for a very aggressive shell, and also makes it very difficult for control decks to do something about this. Then you have that -3 ability, create 2/2 green wolf creature tokens. Also, again, a very powerful effect because you can protect yourself. The last Planeswalker that gave itself 2/2 green wolf creature tokens was a 6 mana Planeswalker in Garruk, and now you have it at 4 mana. So putting 2 creatures on the board for 4 mana is pretty solid. And then you have that ability of the +1 potentially the next turn if you need to protect it first. Now, if you have this on the board and you do the +1 ability and you get to the Nightbound side of things, you've got the Moon's Fury in the wolf side. Arlinn just transformed into a wolf. You have 2 incredible abilities. Either +2, you add a red and a green, which is a fantastic way to ramp, or for no loyalty gain, until end of turn, Arlinn the Moon's Fury becomes a 5/5 werewolf creature with trample, indestructible, and haste. This is fantastic. Planeswalkers that turn into big beaters that are indestructible and transformed back into a Planeswalker at the end of the turn are incredibly hard to deal with. It is very difficult for control decks to deal with. It's very difficult for aggro decks to keep up with it. So this is incredibly powerful. Obviously, it is kind of built. This will fit perfectly in a Gruul Werewolf deck, but it fits in any deck that wants to be somewhat aggressive. This is a Planeswalker that has a ton of value, is incredibly powerful on its own, and one of the more powerful Planeswalkers we've seen in a long time. I'm very excited about it. Let's go to number 4. Number 4, we got another Gruul card, Dire Strain Rampage. 1 a green, a red and a green. So a 3 mana sorcery. And just had a lot of text, so bear with me. Destroy target artifact, enchantment, or land. If a land was destroyed this way, its controller may search their library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them on their battlefield tab, then shuffle. Otherwise, if it's not a land card, its controller may search their library for a basic land card, put it on the battlefield tab, then shuffle. This has flashback for 5. Why is this in my top 5? Because I just heard a lot of downsides. I destroy an artifact, and the controller gets to put 2 basic land cards on the battlefield. Or I destroy one land on the battlefield. Or I destroy a land, and they get 2 back. That doesn't sound that good. What's good about this is the versatility. Like, once you start diving a little deeper into this card, the versatility of this card is incredible. Because it does a couple different things here. It gives you the flexibility to choose to sacrifice your opponent, a ramp opportunity for your opponent by taking out an artifact or enchantment or land if it is a very threatening situation. So if you need to cast this, let's say you're low on health and your opponent has a creature land on their side of the field. You know what? Maybe I just want to take that out. They get 2 lands back, so be it. But at least I'm not going to get hit in the face by that Den of the Bugbear. It's a possibility. Or they have an enchantment that you don't want to see hit stage 2 or 3. being able to take that out for a basic land. Maybe that's worth it. Where this gets really interesting, though, is if you start looking at it as a ramp card. You target one of your own lands. Let's say you play a 3-color deck or a 4-color deck, or you get super spicy in a 5-color deck. You play this and you take out one of your lands that you don't necessarily need, or you just need to ramp up. You target a land and you want to get more lands back. You're basically going to get a +1 on the land count. So you take out one of your lands and you get to pull 2 basics out of your own deck and put on the field. That's pretty incredible from a ramp standpoint. So let's say either you change your color makeup or you just increase your land. Being able to ramp if you don't need to take out an opponent's threat, artifact, enchantment, or land is great versatility. So it's at first glance it looks like a really bad Assassin's Trophy, but then you start looking how you can use it. The amount of times I've had Assassin's Trophy in my hand and thinking like, you know what would be cool if I could take out this land to get another land back that I really want, like a color that I really want. Well, then you get Dire Strain Rampage, and you get it at a flashback cost, and suddenly, wow, you got an awesome design of a card. This is a very fair card, because if you decide to use it against your opponent, there is a downside to it, but it's a fair trade-off. And if you use it for yourself, it's suddenly very spicy. So I love this card. I think there's a lot of ways to use this. I think if you play a Gruul deck that's more towards the mid-range side of things, mid-range through control, so whether it's Gruul, Temur, Jund, I love Jund, or any other color makeup that could play Dire Strain Rampage, unless you're in an aggressive shell, I think you should play at least 1 or 2 copies of this card, if not more. This is very cool. I love this design. Everything about it is very interesting. The first time I saw it, I was like, that's not good at all. But yeah, you're wrong. This is fantastic. All right, now we're getting to the really spicy stuff. We are at the top 3. Number 3, we've got the Meathook Massacre. That sounds like that could be a movie. The art is very interesting. This is a very, very, very cool card. So the cost here, you got an X black and a black for legendary enchantment. When the Meathook Massacre enters the battlefield, each creature gets -X until end of turn. Whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life. Whenever a creature an opponent control dies, you gain 1 life. Again, such a fantastic, well thought out, awesomely designed card. Wizards of the Coast absolutely nailed it with this set. The Meathook Massacre does a lot of things. Again, it's not crazy. It's not out of this world, but it's so well designed that it fits in a lot of decks. If you cast this for 4 mana, all creatures get -2/-2, and then it just kind of sits there doing other things for you. If you're a creature deck, you punish your opponent for taking out your creatures. Maybe you just play this for 2 black, and anytime one of your creatures die, your opponent loses 1 life. It's basically a bad Warlock class, which is still better than not punishing your opponent for taking out your creature. So if you play Warlock's class and you only want it for that effect, maybe it makes sense to put a Meathook Massacre in just for that little extra add-on that you can potentially take out your opponent's creatures as well. Whenever one of your opponent's creatures dies, gaining 1 life, that suddenly makes this very interesting for control decks. So looking at this set as a whole, I really think that Esper Control is going to be the creature deck's nightmare. Some of the removal that are now in Esper colors in combination with the card draw, the Arlen's Epiphany, and some of the top end stuff, Esper Control is going to be sick. So as a control deck, you play this, you take out all your opponent's creatures, you gain life for each creature that died, including tokens, and there's a lot of tokens that are going to be created with this set. And then from that moment on, every time you take out an opponent's creature, you gain a life. That is very, 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 very good for a control deck. So this is relevant in a lot of setups. I think as a mid-range deck, you might even play 1 or 2 copies of this. Overall, a lot of applications, really well-designed card. That's why it's in my top 3. The only reason it's in my top 3 is because the top 1 and 2 are just incredible, and the 1 and 2 for me were the ones that fought for absolute dominance of that number 1 spot. So let's just go ahead and get into it. As for the number 2, and I feel like if you see this number 2, you already know what's number 1. Number 2 is Memory Deluge. Memory Deluge, 2, a blue and a blue for an instant. Look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the amount of mana spent to cast this spell. Put 2 of them into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Again, overall, just very, very powerful effect right there. So basically, this is a think of Behold the Multiverse and how much play that sees. Now, granted, Behold the Multiverse, you can foretell it and then play it, but in reality, you're casting 4 mana for it, and there were plenty of times where I would hard cast a Behold the Multiverse simply because it came to a point where I knew I was going to play it on the opponent's turn anyway, so why spend 2 mana first, only to be spending 2 more later? Might as well do 4 at my opponent's end step. That's how Memory Deluge works as well. You can hold on to it, play it for 4 mana, and then you get to look at the top 4 cards of your library. You get to pick 2, so it's not like it's kind of the same concept where if you would play Behold the Multiverse, you could scry 2 to the bottom and then draw 2. However, those 2 could be worse than the 2 you just scried away. Here you look at the top 4 and you get to pick, like, okay, otherwise I would scry these 2 away, but honestly, this one is probably better than this one, so I'm going to take these 2. That's where Memory Deluge becomes interesting. Where it becomes nutty if you go to the flashback cost. So, flashback is 5 blue and a blue, so 7. You get to look at the top 7 cards and then pick 2 out of there. Again, that's incredibly powerful at instant speed. Now, 7 mana, of course, it's powerful. It has to be powerful at 7 mana. But in these colors, that's not that difficult. What I mean with these colors is blue, you typically pair with a color that allows you to cast Arlenn's Epiphany, because that is the most powerful card in standard once everything else rotates. So Memory Deluge in combination with Arlenn's Epiphany, you're going to have mana to cast this at its flashback cost. So powerful, will be played in every blue control deck or mid-rangey control deck. Overall, I will see less Behold the Multiverse, more Memory Deluge. I still think there's a place for Behold the Multiverse simply because of the foretell that you can possibly cast it on turn 3. But Memory Deluge just has a ton more value. All right, that being said, we are down to the number 1. And I'm pretty sure most of you that's seen some of the previews already or all of the previews will know what this is going to be because it's not been in the top 10 yet. Our number 1, the one and only Sorin with Fateful Absence. 1 and a white for an instant. Destroy target creature or planeswalker. Its controller investigates. Whoa! White just got the most powerful removal card in standard, possibly historic, and several other formats. Fateful Absence is fantastic. An instant, 1 and a white, a 2 mana instant to destroy any creature or any planeswalker. Wow. It's Controller Investigates. I don't care if it's Controller Investigates. I just took out their Lolth or their Liliana. I took out their Mordekainen. I took out their. I don't even care what I took out. I took out their super strong creature or planeswalker, and they get a treasure token that they can crack for 2 to draw a card. Whoopsie doo. I don't care. This is fantastic. Fateful Absence, 1 and a white, instant, destroy target creature or planeswalker. I am here for it. So just like I said earlier, Esper Control is going to be nuts. You've got Fateful Absence. You've got Vanishing Verse. You got Meathook Massacre. And then the top end of having Memory Deluge. You've got Alrund's Epiphany. Whoa. Now, let's say you go to a more aggressive shell. Playing a couple copies of this in an aggro deck is really, there's nothing wrong with that either. My gosh, this is good. There's no downside to this card. I don't care if my opponent gets a treasure token that they can draw a card with if they crack it. Really, unless they have a Prismari Dragon, then they can use it for some ramp. I don't care. I might even kill their Prismari Dragon with this. So overall, just incredibly powerful, super good removal card. This is the first time that I don't feel like I have to be in black to have awesome removal. So, obvious number 1. With that being said, that was my number 10. I've got one more card left to show you guys. I've done this with a couple sets before, if not every one. It's going to be like my honorable mention, which is basically a card I'm super excited about. Really wanted to put in the top 10, but it just didn't make it. Before I do so, please let me know in the comments, before you hit that like and subscribe button, what do you think of my list? What cards did I absolutely miss? What cards am I absolutely wrong about that shouldn't be in here? Let me know. I would love to hear your opinions. And here's my honorable mention. So, going to my honorable mention here. Lisa, Forgotten Archangel, or Liesa, or however you pronounce it. 2 a white, and a black for a legendary creature angel. It's a 4/5 with flying and lifelink. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies, return that creature to its owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step. If a creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead. There's just a lot going on with this card. 4 or 5 flyer lifelink is already really good. It beats Goldspan Dragons in the air, which is really nice, really relevant. Um, and the lifelink effect makes this very powerful too. And if you have creatures that die, you get to put it back in your hand. Think of these colors and the applications you have for it. If you're in an Angels deck, a lot of the Angels benefit from Enter the Battlefield triggers of gaining more life, by example. So if one of those creatures dies and you get the replayed, you get that value again. Skyclave Apparition is another one of those cards. Like, I don't care if my opponent gets a token that's equal to their mana cost in power and toughness if I get to put Skyclave Apparition back in my hand to play it against another 4 CMC or less threat. White Black has a lot of applications for Enter the Battlefield triggers that would be very powerful to have Elias on the top end, or Lisa. Also in like Mardu's Sacrifice, if every time you sacrifice a creature, it just goes through your hand so you can sacrifice it again later, that's just crazy value. You can almost do an infinite loop if you have the well, no, it's at your end step. Never mind. But anyway, you can keep playing your 1 mana zombie and create a treasure token and just play it again next turn for free, basically. So there's just a lot of value there. That's why I really like this card. I also think in every application it's powerful. If you have any kind of creatures in your deck, being able to replay these if you have Lisa in your hand, and exiling your opponent's cards when they die is just super relevant because that way they can come back. The Flying Lifelink makes us a super solid blocker or attacker in the air. Overall, I love this card. I will definitely be playing with it. The reason why it didn't make my top 10 is simply because we've seen similar effects in like Hoffrey. And Hoffrey I put in my top 10 for Strixhaven as number 10, and it just didn't cut it. It didn't see a lot of play. Overall, I think this is better because it has the Flying and Lifelink. It has better synergies, but compared to some of the other cards, I think it's a little bit more niche. That's why I didn't make it. But fantastic card. I will definitely play with this. So, again, hope you enjoyed my list. Hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget that like, subscribe button. Share it. The more people see this, the more I get feedback. And I think overall my suggestions this time are very, very solid. I think every time I put one of these videos out, I get even closer to the mark of hitting that top 10 just right. So, thank you very much for watching. Enjoy the new set. It's going to be fantastic. And I'll see you all on the rank ladder coming a week from now. Bye.